I cannot even express how significant the potential of what can be reached on the regional basis between Israel and the members of the Gulf area, Morocco, Egypt and Jordan, and other partners that are soon to follow.
Welcome to Global Perspectives. Like America, Israel is a country of immigrants. Today, it's my pleasure to bring to you a woman who moved to Israel on her own, has served in the Israel Defense Forces, in the Israeli Diplomatic Corps, and now as a member of Israel's Blue and White Party in the Knesset. A fluent Arabic speaker, she has spent her career building bridges between Jews and Arabs. Join me. Ruth Wasserman Lande, thank you so much for joining me on Global Perspectives.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Ellie. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak with you today.
MK Lande, you are one of the co-chairs of the Abraham Accords caucus of the Israeli Knesset, the parliament. Tell me how that experience has been for you, and what are you seeing in developments in Israel right now?
So, in fact, in the Knesset, we've created the first of its kind pro-Abraham Accords caucus. And luckily, from the coalition, I was chosen as a representative. And I have a co-chair who is from the opposition. And I think this is indicative of the fact that this surpasses political division, bipartisan completely. And really indicates the support that the Abraham Accords have throughout the different parties, right and left. Although I've already heard the head of the Ra'am party, the Islamic party, saying that perhaps this was a mistake on their part. So this is very optimistic as well.
MK Lande, I'm so happy to hear that notion. So what it is that the head of the Ra'am party was saying is a mistake is their rejection of the Abraham Accords. Is that correct?
Precisely. The entire Arab, let's say all the members of Knesset who are Arab, from the left, from the right, the entire body of representatives, of Arab representatives, were against these accords. Saying that this actually bypasses the Palestinians and not taking into account the Israeli-Palestinian negotiation or conflict, whichever you prefer, and therefore cannot be condoned and cannot be forwarded. And currently he's saying that perhaps this was a mistake.
Before we move on from the Abraham Accords, we are witnessing what I think is almost a daily drumbeat of incredibly historic firsts in activities. So just a couple of weeks ago, your president, Isaac Herzog, went to the United Arab Emirates for the first ever presidential official visit to the Emirates. He received a royal welcome at the palace, and the Israeli national anthem was played there along with the Emirati national anthem. I think it was considered an emotional moment for many of us. And just last week, you had the equivalent of the Emirates Parliament members visiting you in the Knesset, including Dr. Ali Al-Nuaimi, who has been a guest of ours on Global Perspectives. What was that meeting like for you?
So first, I'll say that apart from it being the first of its kind caucus, we've now had the pleasure of having a sister caucus in the Congress. This is not at least the work of all the stakeholders involved, including the ones in the UAE. So we have a congressional sister caucus, a Senate sister caucus, and we also have a Friendship Association of the Abraham Accords in the UK Parliament. Now, the visit of Dr. Ali Rashid Al-Nuaimi was amazing because it basically epitomized the fact that the leadership in the UAE is not willing to hold these accords only to the very, very top level, but is very interested in having it really trickle down to the level of the representatives of the National Council and to the business people and to the professionals. In other words, they wanted to trickle down to the people-to-people level as well, which is something that I, as a former diplomat in Egypt, did not have the pleasure of experiencing, despite the 40-odd years of peace that Israel has with Egypt. And this is something very special to truly write home about.
Well, and you're actually bringing me to my next question to you. You did serve in the Israeli diplomatic corps in Egypt, as you just mentioned, and you're a fluent Arabic speaker. How do you compare and contrast that experience of your time in Egypt as an Israeli, as a woman, and the warm peace deals that you're seeing, the relationships that you just mentioned with the Emirates, but also with the Kingdom of Bahrain, the Kingdom of Morocco, and the other countries that have joined the Abraham Accords?
So firstly, I was privileged to go and visit with the current Minister of Defense, Benny Gantz, who is also the head of my political party, Blue and White, very recently for the very first time that a very senior member of the government, Minister of Defense, sets foot on Moroccan soil. This was very, very touching. Not only did I experience warmth, but there was something far beyond that. And I'd like to share this feeling of really spontaneous statements made by people that we've met, both official and unofficial, saying, this is your second home. Now, how is it different to the experience that I've had in Egypt? I would say it's 180 degrees different. I say this with a lot of warmth, love, and embrace that I have in general for the Arab world and for Egypt in particular. I feel that the Abraham Accords are now not only making such a big game-changing impact, but they're also taking the onus off of countries like Egypt and Jordan and allowing them to be a little bit warmer, a little bit closer. And I have significant and perhaps measurable steps that can be seen and mentioned in that tangent, if I may.
Please, and just for the sake of clarity for our audience, the Egyptians were the first to make peace with Israel, and their leader Anwar Sadat paid for making that peace with Israel. He paid with his life for it. And some years after that, we saw the Jordanian kingdom make peace with Israel as well. And I think what many of us have noted is that those were cold peace deals made between those countries and Israel. And in contrast, the Abraham Accords have been warm peace deals where you're seeing full diplomatic ties. This people-to-people engagement you just mentioned, and all that comes with it.
I think that Egypt is one of the most important allies of Israel in the region. I cannot stress the strategic and the security importance of the relationship. And I think that at the moment we are witnessing a very interesting period in which El-Sisi, the president of Egypt, is making small, cautious, but measurable steps towards warming the relations. And honestly, they are small, they are cautious, but one cannot ignore them. For example, they had a Holocaust memorial service for the first time very recently in the last Holocaust Day on the 27th. And this is something that I have not experienced in all the years that I have been following Egypt since 2003. And this is truly something phenomenal, not a given that the Egyptian government has given the green light to hold such a ceremony. And there are other steps as well, business-oriented, security-oriented, and otherwise as well. And I think that the potential is, I cannot even express how significant the potential of what can be reached on the regional basis between Israel and the members of the Gulf area, Morocco, Egypt, and Jordan, and other partners that are soon to follow as well.
If I may, MK, I also would love to talk a little bit about events inside Israel itself. So you have been a longtime resident of the city of Lod, which was in the headlines this last year when in the May Gaza conflict, Hamas started to rain down rockets on Israeli civilians and civilian areas. We also saw a troubling development, which was unrest in Arab towns or mixed towns like Lod, where there are Israeli Jews and Arab Israelis all living together in these towns. And you've spent so much time trying to build bridges in Lod. Tell me your thoughts in the aftermath of all that unrest.
So this was truly a dark moment in Israeli internal history. As somebody who had lived for 10 odd years in the city of Lod, a mixed city by the airport, I think that this has repercussions in terms of internal and external, and I'll explain. I think that a mixture of, I would say, infrastructure, economic issues, and so on the one hand, the differences between Jews and Arabs that need to be taken care of and were not taken care of for some years. This current coalition has truly put on its agenda almost a turning point in terms of its policy towards making up for these gaps, and 30 billion Israeli shekels have been budgeted for education, informal education, and other issues pertaining to these gaps. This is one issue, but it's certainly not the only one. There is also the issue of crime and violence, which is very much on the rise and has been for the past at least 10 to 12 years. Not only was it not properly tackled, unfortunately, in the past years, but the security agencies like the police and other law enforcement agencies have been weakened over the years, and they have not enough policemen, not enough power, not enough budget to be able to truly enforce the law, which is critical in terms of mitigating the crime and violence, particularly on the Arab street, but in general, of course, because crime and violence doesn't have borders. And the third aspect pertains to the issue of external factors which have an interest to try and instigate or incite Arabs from within Israel against Israel itself and the state and Jewish inhabitants. And very happily, they were not successful. They were successful to a certain degree, but they were not successful in the long run. And those are stakeholders such as Hamas and so on.
MK Lande, if I may say, the last time I was in Israel on the ground, we actually dedicated one episode of the show to a visit to the city of Akko. And while I heard all three of the items that you mentioned that led up to the horrible events that took place in Akko, I also heard from the residents there really almost a rejection from the Israeli Arabs in Akko of the notion of living side by side with Jews in a Jewish state. How do you think Israeli society can address that, which is really almost a feeling?
Okay, it's a very complex question, which has a relatively long answer, but I'll try to make it as short and coherent as possible. First of all, we need to work on the internal cohesion and the mutual living between Arabs and Jews. This needs to be funded. This needs to be pinpointed as a strategic goal, not only in the mixed cities like Acre and Lod and others, but throughout the country and in general. We need to understand in the beginning of the state, there was a respect for pluralism. Arabs were allowed to study in Arabic and separately if they wish, including their culture and their religion. Jews, of course, depending on whether you're religious or secular, were permitted to study, if you're religious, in religious schools separately, if you are secular, in secular schools. This, in a manner of speaking, calls for a separation. And if, for example, an Arab child grows up in an Arab village studying separately, they may reach the age of 18 without truly meeting Jewish people. There is a separation. If a boy reached 18, he's Muslim, he's Arab, doesn't want to go to the army, he may not even at the age of 18 meet Israelis that are part and parcel of his mainstream society. So effort needs to be taken in order to create this integration in the workplace, in employment opportunities, in bringing people together. And this is something that has come out perhaps if you can possibly see a positive outcome of the events in May, perhaps this is a positive outcome because this has been highlighted how important, how I would even say critical this integration and this cohesion truly is, and how much attention needs to be paid, particularly to working on people coming together and people to people within the country itself as well.
Well, and I appreciate your optimism and belief that there are steps that can be taken, which leads me to the next question. As you, I'm sure, know very well, Israel is constantly facing accusations of being an apartheid state. And we saw this most recently from Amnesty International, which issued a report that many are criticizing as being completely inaccurate and false in so many ways. You're someone who has spent so many years of your own life building bridges among the various different minority groups in Israel. What is your response to these accusations of Israel being an apartheid state?
Without a doubt and without a question, the Amnesty report is preposterous. There is no question. I lived as a child in South Africa post-apartheid. And quite frankly, I mean, and with all respect to, I'm sure, intelligent, smart people, it's truly, it is nothing less than preposterous. And I invite those wonderful researchers or writers or analysts to come in and take a look at the current coalition with the Islamic Muslim party being part and parcel of the current coalition, members of Knesset, members of the legislative body, higher judges that have put former presidents in prison, Jewish presidents, because of different issues that they have done against the law. There is nothing that could possibly compare Israel and the daily life here to apartheid. It is nothing less than preposterous. That is not to say that the country is perfect.
I also want to note that just this week we saw the head of the Islamist party Ra'am, which is a part of the ruling coalition in Israel, make a statement to the Washington Institute for Near East Affairs that indeed he rejects the label of apartheid on Israel. So you know, you do have Israeli Arabs themselves echoing your statements. MK Lande, I know we're running out of time, and so my last question to you, you are a female diplomat in Israel, you're a member of Israel's Knesset. May I ask, what is next for you? Because many of us who are following your career do have high hopes for seeing you at the international level from Israel.
I love my country. I made Aliyah. I emigrated to this country from South Africa. After being born here as a child, I left to South Africa after my family, my parents and my sister and brother. I came here to serve. And as such, I see a huge privilege. And I say this with humility to serve this country. It's not just another spot on the map. It's a spot that is supposed to be the sanctuary of the Jewish people who throughout the centuries. God knows that my people have undergone persecutions, and I think that there needs to be a safe haven, one safe haven, which is also a kind of a democratic beacon. And this is what I strive to serve, that ideal and my people. And as long as I feel that I have meaningful service, I hope that you shall continue to also see and follow my career in that regard.
Well, we will certainly be following you, and look forward to hearing wonderful, more continued great news from you and from the State of Israel. MK Ruth Wasserman Lande, thank you so much for joining me on Global Perspectives.
Thank you so much, and thank you for all of that you are doing.